Okay. Let's not even debate tonight, guys, Obamacare, good and bad, because I know we're going to have differences of opinion. But can we just say last night was not a good day for this country when a clown is reading Dr. Seuss and quoting, in all seriousness, The Empire Strikes Back and, what was it, Rednecks Rules, or whatever he was doing here. Come on. As a country, Washington's become a punchline. But if you want to know Exhibit A as to why, that clown last night here is leading the parade.
Yeah, you know, he goes down that goofy road. There always seems to be something attached to these filibusters where they'll read something, they'll quote something odd. These odd moments where they'll have to go to the bathroom, somebody will come fill in for them. It's always a bit of theater. There's always a bit of theater involved. I think, though, at the very least, and I'm sincere when I say this, it's in the rules. He could do it. He wanted to make a stand. He's making a statement, goofy as it was. I think there is some substance there because at least he's literally falling on a sword.
All right, but Andrew, Jimmy Stewart in a movie you've probably memorized by heart by now, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Mm-hmm. People know it because there was a principle there. Yeah. He was fighting for something, and it wasn't about where can I maximize my airtime so that not only C-SPAN but everybody will be talking about this. He does the math. He knows Republicans aren't standing with him in the Senate. He even knows House Republicans are breaking away from him. He knows with the math here that he'll never get this thing through. It's failed 43 times, for crying out loud. So this wasn't about some principled stand, rules notwithstanding. This was about the worst that Washington has become. How do I get my 15 minutes without any threat or hope of passage just to make some political grandstanding here? And I'm sorry, he's not just embarrassing himself in the process. He's grinding everything to a halt with time we can't afford to lose, and also with whatever shred of reputation had left, the U.S. Senate now is almost as bad as the House.
It was clearly a grandstanding move on Cruz's part. He had really boxed himself into a corner. He spent all summer going around on a defund Obamacare or shut the government down bus tour, and he goaded House Republicans into passing the bill that they passed. And then he realized he didn't have the votes for it, and so this really was a face-saving move on his part. Having said that, it does have value for Ted Cruz and his true believers on the far right. And it was, for all that we see of Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, his true believer drank the Kool-Aid crowd will find that in what he did, the same way that Rand Paul's filibuster on drone strikes resonated with a large bunch of Republicans.
And Democrats.
And raise money, and raise a lot of money for him.
Look, from a process standpoint, it's the dumbest thing that could have possibly happened. But from a stirring the base kind of thing, there's actually more value to this than you might give credit to.
Because if I may,
okay,
there are a lot of people who
Dominic,
do believe this is a bad law.
There might be a bad
and we're not
thing,
going to debate it.
I know that, TJ. But my only point is, that's fine.
Sure.
But we had that fight where the House and the Senate, we had it for years, the debate over Obamacare. It was finally voted on.
Yeah.
And by the rules of our country, it passed.
But
and it was finally law. Time out.
Okay.
Then the U.S. Supreme Court, not that they needed to,
Right.
but they chose to take this up, and they validated the key portions of the legislation. It is law. It has passed. It's got validation through the courts. To say that you're going to hold the country political hostage and you'll shut the government down, we're already seeing what's happened with the markets as a consequence. Yeah. That's now not only fighting on whatever you believe, you're changing the rules of the game.
But you know what?
And it's political arsonism.
But there have been things, and I know we're not debating the merits of the law, but there have been things that the goalposts have been moved. There have been issues within this law that have changed in terms of delaying the implementation of. We're starting to see how in fact rates are not going down; they are rising. Jobs are not being created.
Every argument that Cruz made last night about the health care was wrong. I mean, just about every single one of them was absolutely wrong.
Every fact checker today dissected
points.
when he finally stopped talking at noon and said, wrong, 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 wrong. I mean, I don't want to let facts get in the way of a good story. But Dominic, this morning, I make my kids before we head out to drop them off at the school, whatever, got the morning news on. And you know how it works. It's about 10 minutes of news before it turns into who knows what else. But one of them turned to me and said, why is the guy reading Dr. Seuss?
Right.
And for the life of me, I had a hard time explaining. And it's not like, oh, the poor children. I don't care. It's fine. But my point is, I'm like, it's a good question. Why is the idiot doing this? We have October 1, as we said, as a real deadline. And I think, maybe I'm alone, I agree with everything you guys said. There's political value to it. Also, you, Dominic, you can raise money. But it's not a good thing when the approval rating of Congress is less than 10%. That's
Richard,
not healthy for this country or democracy.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But when you're one of 100 in the U.S. Senate and you want to be somebody, sometimes you have to do theatrics like this. That's all it is. Whenever, one thing TJ is correct about, when they do these filibusters, who can talk for an hour straight?
But if you're an unserious person with an unserious agenda,
but first of all,
legitimate person saw do this?
Okay, but Senator Byrd did it. Wait. Senator Byrd went on longer over civil rights, opposing civil rights.
And Bernie Sanders did it a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so they all do it.
But what were they threatening, Dominic? You're right. People have both political parties use the filibuster. But they're screwing around with time they don't have.
I agree with you.
It's already been passed.
But remember this: we may call him nuts, we may call him a showman, but he's only
worse. But
he's only 9 months into his first term in office.
You know what? May I also?
And he stands out.
No. May I submit this too? Part of what Richard's getting at. No, he said no. I can't. What Rich? Oh, stop, all of you! I've been up a very long day today. Here's the thing: if we were to also keep in mind what he's saying, yes, we're up against it now. He's using time that we don't have. Now that is based upon to go and look at the macro of Washington. The reason that we're up against it and we're looking at another government shutdown is because of the absolutely dysfunctional methods of both parties, the lack of leadership of this president, the lack of no. That is why we're up against it.
That's the biggest load of BS that I always hear
What are you
everybody
talking
say.
about?
Time out.
DC's a mess.
How many times?
I'm agreeing with you.
No, how many times have they tried to pass legislation to defund Obamacare?
I know, like in the 50s or something like that.
It's 43 times.
43, okay.
After the 50th time, when they knew they couldn't get the thing passed, do you think they'd get a clue?
I'm pulling back further. I'm panning back and looking at the big picture of what we're talking about.
The linkage of Obamacare funding to the budget or to the debt limit is far more asinine and far more dangerous than what Ted Cruz did last night. This is just the latest version of the idiocy of this whole thing. To tie the budget or the debt limit to defunding Obamacare, to me, is absolutely abdicating their responsibility, and that's the dangerous part of this entire process.
And I don't disagree with that.
That's why this filibuster is that much more dangerous.
I don't disagree.
I have one quick thing, Dom, and then when we come back, we're going to have another part of this conversation. We saw now Bill Clinton, who obviously failed in his presidency to get health care reform passed. He's now standing with the president. The administration says they're going to go on a 6-month offensive. I've heard the words before, all trying to sell this plan, and they haven't really done it. Andrew's mentioned before, if you listen to what Ted Cruz has said in the past, he's worried that when the thing's fully implemented, too many Americans are going to like what's in there, okay? As he said, the sugary sweet stuff of this. Is there a chance that they can finally get out of their way and the administration can actually sell the stuff in here from people who know what's in it, while imperfect? There's more to like than not like, so say the supporters, but the administration's never sold it. They've even let it been labeled Obamacare instead of the Affordable Care Act. Do you think that in the third iteration they can actually sell the thing?
They need Bill Clinton to do that. You raise a very legitimate point, and I think we all agree that there are some very good things in there if we can ever get to it. That's the question. But the Republicans, Richard, they're going to fight tooth. What this is all about, everybody at home, plain and simple, they don't want this president to have a signature issue that he can look back on for his legacy. That's what this is all about.
There's people at home.
We don't want, because, okay, so what's the answer? I know Richard don't want to debate the merits. Is the answer to leave the healthcare system that we have where people are dying?
No.
So what's the answer?
No, the answer is where we are now is there are people at home whose health insurance premiums have gone up in the last 2 years that are continuing to go up. There are people in this country, our jobs, there are companies who are not expanding and not hiring.
It's either Obamacare or leave the horrible system that we have.
It's the idea that it needs to be done differently, and now we're going to get into the merits, and so I don't want to. But I mean, no, it's not a matter of one or the other.
I think everybody agrees, TJ, that the law that is getting implemented, albeit slowly, is an imperfect one. Many people think it's better, as Dominic said, than the status quo. But the ability to negotiate or try and find, the president's even sounded a willingness to go over specific items of it. They want to defund the whole thing. And that is where the problem is. You can't negotiate with a madman. And that, if you hear from the administration's perspective, that's what they're up against every time. It's not, well, let's take an element for it. Either we defund it all here, or we're going to let the government shut down.
Is there not something to be said from those who say, look, once this thing is implemented, the tougher thing to do than get something done in Washington is to undo something at the federal level. There are people that are concerned enough about the imperfections of this law being so devastating.
I'll let you have the last word here. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation, but I want you, the sound off at home, please go head over to Facebook and Twitter and answer a question tonight on what Ted Cruz did. Was that a principled stand we saw last night all into this morning, or was that pure political theater? I think you know my answer. I'm curious of yours. When we come back, Andrew sat down today, or stood up with, Nita Lowey, the congresswoman from New York, Westchester County, on what she thinks of not only Cruz's theatrics, but of the ticking clock in D.C.